This meeting is hosted by the Artists and Tradition Bearers group. Right now, our group is pretty much a learning group and a discussion group. We have reconvened, I say recently, but I guess it's probably been since fall of last year or summer. The time's flying by, but it had been going on for some time and then had stopped. So we've reconvened it, but have wanted to put our heads together eventually around maybe a project or something. But building up attendance and participation and just seeing what's out there for us to work on together. So we've been happy to host some learning groups and some like discussions and special guests. So Louis is part of that tonight. But if you want to continue, we should be having some more presentations in the future. Rachel, would you like to talk about your French group really quickly, or?
Yeah. So I believe, and Maida, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Louisiana French Working Group was one of the first working groups to get started. I think it was during the Louisiana Folklore Society meeting whenever we were in Breaux Bridge, when people started creating working groups. So it was started up by David Cheremy. And we've done the main project that we've done was a summit that we organized last fall. And the summit was, it's just what it sounds like. It was kind of like a conference. We had 4 pillars that we invited people to come and speak about. We had panels, we had professionals, stakeholders, French speakers, native French speakers, and learners from every population group in the state. So we had Native Americans, we had Creoles, we had Cajuns, we had people like myself who are not in any of these categories and came from somewhere else, but just work in French. So we had like young Francophone professionals, I tend to call us, a lot of educators. And the pillars that we were focused on are still the 4 pillars that we discuss in the group. So they are community development, basically. So like kind of communications, how to best disseminate information about French projects and supporting the French language in Louisiana, economic development, how to better serve people who want to leverage their knowledge of French in their job and in finding a job or getting contracted work. A survey, because there is among a lot of French-speaking people in Louisiana, kind of an unease about whether or not the data that is out there about the number of French speakers is actually correct. Like, does the census data, is that correct? Can we trust it? What about language studies that have been done in the last several years? Should they need to be updated? And then the fourth pillar is legislation. So on that topic, the working group, we see ourselves as like a forum. Miss Ivy, who is the convener, who she's an amazing retired professional. Her background is in public relations. She is like the best moderator for any group. She keeps everybody on task, but as she always says, our group is a neutral ground. So people come and they talk about different legislative items. Especially recently, there have been a lot of bills about French that have gone before the Louisiana legislature. And so basically we're a place where people can share information about that. And yeah, like a learning discussion, like you were saying, Lola, because a lot of us, even, a lot of people in the working group are French educators, like people who have backgrounds in French literature and culture, like myself. I'm not a linguist and I don't know anything about legislation, but we've invited people who do know to share that process so that we can know what is going on. Dr. Robin White, who is a French and English professor at Nichols State University, the same. She's like, I just got to know about this, like this data, this linguistic data in the surveys. Like, she's like, I'm not a linguist, you know, I teach literature and history. I don't know whether or not I can trust like the census data. So she gathered a lot of demographers and linguists to come and talk to us about how to interpret data. And what a lot of the ongoing projects that whenever we gather and share information and we break down into like subcommittees so people can work on these projects now are moving in the direction of like signage in local areas. So we have Maggie Justice, who works at Codafil, who she's informed us on past projects she's done, for example. So she's like, I can give y'all a heads up on what are the challenges if you're going to be engaging in this kind of project of how to get French signs in your community. So I did also, and then there's one area that a lot of people in the French language community in Louisiana tend to bring up, or one thing they bring up is that they wish that there were more centralized communication platforms for everything that's going on in French in Louisiana. And I mean, in this day and age, you would think we would have that, but you know, everybody has so many platforms. So I will, for this group, I think this could be pertinent for future projects that you may have as an artist or a tradition bearer for incorporating French. If you don't speak French, but you want your project to be bilingual or have Louisiana French or Louisiana Creole, or you want someone to proofread something that you're working on or translate something that you're working on. There was a website that was recently developed by one of our members, Joseph Dunn, who works at Laura Plantation. He and Michael Gisclair, who does all kinds of projects. He lives in Florida, but he's from down the bayou. He speaks Louisiana French and Louisiana Creole. He's really talented with like web developing and all and technical things. But they launched this website. I'm about to put it in the chat, and it's supposed to solve, kind of like fill in that gap of where can we go to find things out? And so it's a way to upload events with an events calendar, but they've just launched a page called Personnalité, or there's an English version, People, as well. And so it'll be kind of like a LinkedIn or like a culture list where you can find folks who do work in French, do art in French, have professional skills in French, so that you can just know in Louisiana, and more specifically, like we'll ask them to specify what kinds of French, you know, Corrivini, Louisiana French, Standard French, what can you do? And then you can network with them or potentially even hire them or partner with them on something. But yeah, that's not like, you know, that's two individuals who just communicate with our group what they do. You know, it's not our project, it's theirs, but it's pretty exciting. And I'll put it in there so you guys can check it out. So and yeah, like put your events in there, make a profile. Like I haven't made a profile yet, but I'm going to.
That's awesome, Rachel. Thank you for sharing. Before we get started,
I would just like to make a broad
Yeah.
statement about the Bayou Culture Collaborative. If you're new
Yes.
to it, I'm going to put in the chat a link that can go to everything. But our big monthly gathering is next Friday, and everything focuses on including culture and the human dimension in environmental planning. And so we really welcome you, encourage you to participate in one of the gatherings or the working groups, whatever fits into your life. So here is the link in the chat.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much. Well, I think after those wonderful introductions about our working group, we're going to get started with our special guest speaker. You ready, Louis?
I'm ready. I'm just reading about the Bayou Culture Collaborative.
Oh, yeah.
I clicked the link already.
Oh, nice.
I'm ready.
Well, you know, we would love to welcome you, Louis, best known as the lead fiddle player and singer for the Grammy award-winning Lost Bayou Ramblers. with a passion for Louisiana French and local folklore and sustainability in the fastest disappearing landmass in the world. These are what fuels his career as a musician. 6 film scores, over 20 LPs under his belt, and his music career continues to push the boundaries of the Louisiana French music traditions. So thank you, Louis, for joining us to share your perspective on music and language in the Louisiana soundscape.
So glad to be here, and thank y'all for having me. The timing was great, as you mentioned earlier. It was a really really plentiful festival season, and also full of a few doses of tragedy with the loss of Chris Stafford, and it's been quite a few weeks. So I'm glad we're doing it now when things have calmed down just a little bit.
Yeah.
Speaking of soundscapes and language, I feel like I've heard so many bands and performed so many times just in the last month. It's it's nice to get on the other calmer side of the soundscape every once in a while. And we're about to go into the calmest season of all, the summer. It's the summer, like last summer was so long and drawn out and hot. And we didn't get out nearly enough last summer. Hoping to get out a little more this summer. But just having to come off of this big spring season, it makes me think of, what is one important part of language, and with like what I chose was the soundscape, because I think that's how do we enrich our own lives, whether as citizens of this state or as thinking about people who want to come here and enrich their own lives coming here. And I think that language is obviously the first thing that we hear on the human soundscape. Of course, nature being the other balance to that, the human and the nature and how they coexist. And so I think that taking a stand for language, to me, is a bit parallel to taking a stand for the environment. You can go into the history of it, it gets a little complex. And what is the importance of French? Is it a colonial language? Is it where does it have attributes to native culture and such like that? And how has it changed within cultures? And it's become the main language for many of the local tribes who have used French because they don't have much of their own language left. Now, some of them have been definitely keeping their own languages alive. Like I know there's a tiny movement in the Attakapaw language, and the tribe is alive and thriving in more than people realize. And it's amazing that the language still exists at all. But to what extent is it? It's a written continuation, a spoken continuation. But as far as in daily life, it's barely exists in that sense. But it's amazing that people are keeping it alive. And I think that with French has become a common ground for so many cultures in Louisiana. And when you get to Louisiana, whether you're coming from somewhere or you're experiencing it in a daily life, such as most of us here today. I know some of y'all aren't in Louisiana, I'm pretty sure. Maybe. I was thinking one of y'all lived in Illinois, but I don't think that was a different person. So anyway, whether or not we're all in Louisiana or not, when you walk out the door, what do you hear? Do you hear, the interstate and English, or do you hear someone speaking French and a tractor? It's what is the environment that dictates your lifestyle and how you're able to enrich your life each day. And personally, I love to connect with nature, and I try my best to keep my balance between nature and, say, going to New Orleans, which is both. New Orleans has a lot of nature and a lot of culture and a lot of city life. But when it comes to actual language, you know, that is something that I seek out any chance I have to speak French. I try and make the most of, you know, when I meet someone who speaks French, I continually insist on speaking French. You know, if I know like, oh, okay, you speak French, well, let's speak French, because why not? You know, and it's fine. It's fine. Any language is fine. But to me, that is what enriches my life the most, because it gives me an experience that is something that I have searched for, you know, just as one might search for solace in nature and peace of mind in nature. Why does one go camping, and why does one take vacations? And, you know, same thing in the city. You can find solace in different peace of minds in the city and such. But, you know, to me, I see it as the soundscape of hearing the crickets, of hearing the birds, hearing the bird calls is what is pleasing to my ear. And just like music, it's music to my ears. And, you know, I think that the language is such a huge part of what makes my life, gives it a direction to work towards. And I think that's what we're all, like what Rachel was speaking of earlier. I think that is, it's so important to just be able to offer the language, whether or not the creator or the person that is involved in something speaks it or not. I think it's great to be able to offer for things to happen in multiple language, because that just gives it another leg up. You know, it gives it another leg to stand on, and it allows people to have a different experience with whatever they're working with. You know, whether it be music or literature or tourism or business. I think that it is very, very powerful economically. It's very powerful culturally, and it is something that I didn't see coming in my life, but when it finally did enter my life, it's never left. Like, I started learning French around 18 years old, and it's become just such a huge part of my life. Um, and then furthermore, you know, kind of giving space for the language has been most of my musical career. I mean, I've played a lot of music that wasn't in French before starting Lost Bayou Ramblers. I also played music that was in French as well. So I had the French side with Les Frères Michot and my family band, and then I had like the English side, original music playing in high school and such. But since really diving into French and incorporating to my music and allowing myself to, you know, to write and express myself in French, and the different sides of my own life and my own, you know, experience, interaction with uh, our region and my life in our region, I've more recently uh, tried to do better at incorporating more nature sounds into the music. And so, you know, I think that you know, music uplifts people. It gives people a certain sense of I don't know. I mean, peace is a interesting word. You know, it gives people a sense of belonging or vibration, or it gives all kind of emotions that music brings. And, you know, I think that the language within the music is so important, because, you know, it's that sense of place, and it's that rhythm that fits. Like, I always make this analogy that if you know, you can do salsa in German, it just doesn't sound the same. You know, if you're singing Latin music in German, you can do it. It just doesn't have the same cadence, and it just doesn't have the same belonging. I think that that's where language really fits, obviously in local music. And I like to imagine that it has a continued place in society and kind of gives us that same life day-to-day experience, which is why, you know, I try to insist on speaking French when I can. You know, it's a big a lot of factors. Like I know people who speak French, and we're not speaking French right now, but that's, that's the thing. It's always the, if one person doesn't speak French, or you don't want to be rude, or it's just easier to speak English and such. But yeah, I could go on and on about it, but it's definitely, become just such an important part of my life. And but it's also, it's also a struggle, and I think it's a struggle that we all experience together. How do we how do we bring French to the forefront? How do we bring language to the forefront? And and I think that it also, tells a story about who we are. It tells a story about where we come from. And English does that as well. And, stories are told from different perspectives. But French, I think, has a very complex nature to it, in our sense in Louisiana, where, why do we say cocodrie? Because for alligator, because the Spanish influence. And why do we say boucan for smoked meat? Because of the Haitian influence. And why, which was a Taino native Haitian word. And and there's so many. And why do we say boscoyo? Because it's a Native American word. And so it's become French, and it's become more than just French. It's become, a whole series of dialects and a whole series of people, history, and places that have, it really tells the story more completely when we can tell it in French. I have, yeah, I was gonna, anyone have any, questions and
I,
comments?
I wanted to like ask you a question and then kind of segue into placemaking, because what you said about for those of us who speak French or speak another language, everyone has lived that experience of like, well, if somebody doesn't speak that language, then you go back to like the lingua franca, like English. You speak the language because it's nice, it's polite. But in Louisiana, we have this very, like, people are really good at placemaking, where you carve out these spaces, which tend to be artistic or cultural, that are designated for French. So you have Festivals Acadiens Creole. And when somebody gets up on the stage to announce the next band, they're going to do it in French, because those are the rules, right? That's the space and the time and the place. And I'm pretty sure, Louis, you were involved with getting a French table in New Orleans started with Beanlandia. Is that true?
Yep, definitely.
Yeah, so that's like an example of that. And then I see now, I've never gone and participated. I think I'm never in New Orleans in the middle of the week. But now they have like a ball. They have a French dance, right? And they have like French bands with a French table.
Yes.
So
Yes, Sundays, right? Sundays
that's
are
on
the
Yep,
Sunday.
Sundays.
days.
Yes, Sundays. Yep.
Yeah, so now it's like on the weekend when other people can go. And then so I'm in Lafayette. I work at UL, and so we're known as like, we have a lot of these like spaces that have been around for a long time. French tables, like that's part of the soundscape and the landscape of like this area in Acadiana. You could just pick like every day of the week, you can pick a spot where you're gonna go, and it's like French only right here. But yeah, I was just excited to see that. And not that there aren't other spaces in other larger cities, and of course in small towns there are lots of places where French is spoken. But yeah, it is this very kind of deliberate thing where you have to just like carve it out, lay the ground rules.
I think you said something very important just in that actually makes a complete sense with placemaking, because the French table itself has become the kind of ground zero place for, okay, this is French. Because, and the reason I say it is because when we were launching the series you're talking about, which we did do on Mondays, so it was a weekday, and then we moved it to Sundays because I was trying to go with the Mondays. We used to have like such a great Monday night for music shows, like in different, like industry night, when people who were working all weekend doing music or working out in the entertainment and service industry could actually go and have a good night. We used to have some great stuff in Lafayette and all over. It didn't catch on great on Mondays over there, so we moved it to Sunday. But when I was doing some of the initial promotions for it, some people from Canada reached out and said, "What is a French table?" I was like, "Wow, we take it for granted that a French table, it's a table where you sit and speak French." And so that is definitely ground zero for that deliberate space that you're talking about. And it's a very important place in so many communities. I mean, I've definitely met a lot of people at French tables that I've ended up doing a lot of work with, a lot of collaboration, if you will. And, and it's a place for language, it's a place for music. And it's the cool thing about it too, is that it's a place where it doesn't matter where you're from, what type of French you speak, how experienced you are in speaking French, but everyone can kind of get together and learn together, teach things together. And it's, that is definitely one of the most deliberate and intentional places that there is, the French table.
You were talking earlier about how speaking French and keeping that in your, as like just part of daily life, that being that sense of belonging that it's cultivating. And then it's really beautiful to see that evolution, or the return to that, because it was so famously repressed and people were punished for it for so long, for claiming that as part of their identity. And obviously not the only, group that has experienced that, but it's just like the overarching like Americanization, the homogenization is so repressive. It's really beautiful. Yeah, it's beautiful to see the resurgence of that, and through everyone's hard work, and that you could go about your day and not think twice about that being integrated. But it seems like why, that's at the root of all of this work around folk culture and culture in general, is just fostering that belonging and community, and like that sense of place and sense of yeah.
It's a lot of work to keep diversity. It's a lot of work to keep an ecosystem in balance. I mean, it takes a lot of representation, whether it's a cultural ecosystem or an environmental ecosystem. I believe that, diversity is stability. And, the more, I mean, it works like that in nature. Like if you have all the parts that keep each other in check, and if you start removing parts, the whole thing is in danger of collapse. And I think that, that is definitely the same is true about culture, language, people, society. And the thing is, it takes a lot of work, like you're saying. I mean, it takes a lot of representation, a lot of fighting for what you believe is right, just like it does with the environment, and you see things being taken for granted over and over, and before long, there's a bit of a collapse and you lose what you once had, what you took for granted. So it definitely does take, work. Now, I don't necessarily see myself as an activist, but I think I try to, I think my activism is just trying through using it, is the way that has worked for me. And, I think that, but there takes all types, and it takes the people doing legislation in politics, it takes people doing education in the schools, it takes people doing performances, it takes all of the different, it takes the BCC, everything is a part of the greater whole, and everything is important. And, that's the frustrating thing about it, is that, really, no one's just going to say, oh yeah, this is important, boom, let's make it a part of something. It takes a bunch of individuals. And, it's, it seems like an uphill battle, but it's worth it every time. And, I think that the gains we've made, people wouldn't have thought that we'd be here today talking about it, much less speaking it to the amount that it does exist. And I think that is proof right there that all this work is for something. And it's like, and like I started the talk, it's for enriching our own lives and, you know, making our existence a little more meaningful in my opinion.
Louis, can I ask you a question about, you were talking about incorporating more nature into your work, and then that, you know, bringing awareness to certain aspects of that. And with your new record, I'm thinking specifically about the Ivory-billed woodpecker. Maybe you have some other instances you might want to talk about how you've incorporated that into your work these days, and you know, for a while, I know.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the first major time that I mean, the biggest moment that nature has found itself collaborating with my music was when we recorded Tiny Island on the island right behind me here. It's just a little, it's a tiny island. It was just, we dug to make a road and we left an island in the middle. We went on there with Layla McCalla and the Melody Makers who I was playing with at the time. We got on the little island, we started playing, and all these frogs just started joining in. And we're like, man, we just happened to be where they're singing. We'd stop the song and they would all stop. So we'd start playing again, they would chirp back again, and it just kept going like that all night. We would just be laughing, and it brought such an unexpected, you know, kind of joyous, mysterious, wondrous vibe to the music, because it was like, okay, how do we bring in this surprise element of nature that we weren't expecting? We were like, oh, we're out in nature, and all of a sudden nature's, you know, on our record. And and you know, you can hear it in the record, we're laughing and making the most of it, and it's really loud. And then, you know, fast forward the next year, I started working on my first solo album, basically out of necessity because of the pandemic. You know, took so much work from musicians, live venues and such. And I had a lot more time to think and hear my own thoughts, inspirations, wake up with music in my head from, you know, dream time and such. And I was set up in a little houseboat that's on a trailer out here that a friend of mine was making into a studio and abandoned it for a bigger houseboat studio. So I had time to refurbish it, renovate it during the pandemic. And when I'd be out there, especially early in the morning, like, you know, I wake up before the sun. I enjoyed doing that. And especially then I wasn't tired from gigs. I was just waking up every day to, you know, the same thing, which was it was a bit of a treat besides not being able to make a living. But so I would wake up every morning real early, and I would go down, and often I'd have an idea in my head, and I'd start writing it down, recording it. And I started noticing that when I would start messing with the guitar or messing with the music, that the birds would start chiming in. And now the birds were already going, you know, often early in the morning like that. But when I would start performing, I would hear them kind of changing with me, or at least I thought so. But then I had proof. Because I recorded enough of the songs where I put 2 microphones, stereo mics, on the front of the houseboat, which was on the land. It wasn't in the water. And so I'd record nature at the same time I was recording my music. And sometimes it'd be crows, you know, and it happened to be a darker piece that I was working with. Sometimes it happened to be cardinals, or even got the painted bunting and some other birds like that, and happened to be more of a more appropriate song for, you know, kind of lovey-dovey kind of bird sounds and such, if you will, a love song. And when I went and mixed this song that is called Les Beaux Jours, it's from the Lomax collection. And when I went and mixed it, the birds that were chirping in the recording signaled for the same birds to continue. They weren't singing when I started mixing it, but when I was mixing it, they started singing again. And they heard the birds in the record. And so it just kind of created this feedback loop. So what I did was when I mixed it, I put more mics outside and I recorded the birds singing back and forth to each other through the recording. And that was, to me, that was kind of the proof that yes, they were attuned to what I was doing, and they were attuned to, the music I was making. Hey, possibly even the language, if you want to talk about collective memory or something like that, who knows? It's beyond me to read the bird's mind, but I like to interact with it when I have the chance. But speaking of, you mentioned the Ivory-billed woodpecker, and I had been, my father, Tommy Michot, who's a musician and a biologist, has been searching for the Ivory-billed woodpecker, has been on the extinction list for many decades, and they haven't had a sighting since, I believe, the 1930s or so, or confirmed sighting. And my Uncle David was telling me a story about how they were out in the swamps in the 70s projecting the call of the Ivory-billed woodpecker from Arthur Allen from 1935. And I don't know what they were using, what kind of speaker system, what kind of technology there was in the late 70s, early 80s to be doing so, but they were trying to get a response from the Ivory-billed woodpecker because he'd been looking for it for that long. Still hasn't had a confirmed sighting, but they have had some published research y'all might have seen in the last few months from him and his colleague. But anyway, my Uncle David shared that recording with Dickie Landry, and Dickie Landry ended up making a piece called "The Call of the Ivory-billed Woodpecker" that he laid the music over one of Tina Gerard's art exhibits in Germany called Documenta. Was the story that I'm piecing together. Now, I want to still get more details, and I spoke with one of Tina Gerard's, one of the people who curates, who has, keeps track, her art at the show we were at the Ogden last week, the Tina Gerard exhibit from her time in Haiti. And so everyone's still it's still a bit of a mystery exactly what happened there. It's called the Call of the Ivory-billed Woodpecker. And I want Dickie Landry come and perform on my song that was inspired by my time alone in the middle of the swamp. And I wasn't even thinking about the Ivory-billed woodpecker. I was actually thinking about the silence in the swamp. Because sometimes you go and it's very loud, but this swamp across the street here, it's seasonal. And when it's dry, you can walk back there and walk amongst the giant cypress trees and the cypress knees taller than me. And often you don't see anything. You don't see a bird. You think, oh, I'm going to go back there and there's going to be snakes and alligators. You don't see anything. It's just so silent. And that's what that song I wrote was about, the Bosco Yo Flow. It's my little Cajun French rap song. And I wrote it, just sitting on a log out there and just remarking about how you could just disappear, and like how the kind of the king of nothing back there, and so when I had Dickie Landry come perform it, it wasn't until then that I thought about the Ivory-billed woodpecker, and I played him the Arthur Allen recording that originally had inspired him in the 70s, which he still kind of was like, oh yeah, I might have done that. I don't know. If you say so, I did that, but it's not like a record exists of it or nothing. And it was 50 years ago about. And so I played him that, and I described my experience. So I played him on one hand the call of this amazing call of this majestic bird that we think still exists, but no one has been able to record audio or video or a picture in since the 1930s. And on the other hand, I described what I was experiencing out there in the swamp that day of just, it was so quiet, you could just hear the wind going through the leaves of the cypress trees. So he performed both of those inspirations in the song, in his saxophone playing. He did air through the saxophone. He did the call and response with the Ivory-billed. And, it's that is the, the expression and the sense of place that he was able to add to my experience of sense of place in there. And, and to me, it all goes back to when I see Dickie, I love to speak French with him. And, he loves to speak French with me. And it's not what you think. When you think Dickie Landry, you think of avant-garde and artists, but he's from the old school French culture of Cecilia. And he said, and he still tends to his grandmother's house and his pecan orchard out there. And he said, he tells me that his grandma told him that there used to be 50 fiddle players on their road. There used to be fiddle players all up and down their road. And like, to imagine what that must have sounded like, when they would be playing and where they'd be playing and all that is amazing. But he went to New York and explored his own sonic world and made his own sonic world and heavily influenced the sonic world we live in today. And he's still doing it. So, I mean, I just think that, between the language and the music and nature and all that, when it all comes together, you make something brand new, and you're using something old, and you're using something that already exists, but you're making something brand new. And that's, I think, one way in which it keeps alive, is making something new and not trying to, keep something old going. You have to keep it relevant, and it has to keep adapting with the times. And I think that's why French is still as alive as it is, even with, Codafil and such. They might be teaching a more standardized French, but that is part of changing with the times, and that is part of why French is important, because it is an international language, and one can always, incorporate dialect, and one can always code switch and have an international impact and a local importance and place as well.
Thank you for sharing those great stories, Louis. I'm noticing the time. It's 6:48. I loved hearing about the intertwining of nature with all of your work. I also, as you were talking, I included some links, some reference links, for a few things, including that video for Bosco Yo Flow. And I noticed Pippin Frisbee Calder is in our chat here meeting tonight, and she is a wonderful artist who we featured a few meetings ago. She gave us a presentation, and I linked to her ivory bill woodpecker installation and exhibit. I know that y'all collaborated a bit.
Yeah, which I have to say now at this point that I reached out to her because I heard she had done the ivory bill woodpecker, and she drew me some ivory bill woodpeckers that I've been incorporating into my live show, and also inspired our video team, Honest Art, to incorporate into the video of Bosco Yo Flow. Now, Pippin did the ivory bill woodpecker properly with the proper markings, and then the artist who used inspiration from that to animate it did not properly mark it. So a few of the scientists have been calling me out on the markings of the ivory bill woodpecker in the video, but Pippin did it properly, and really enjoyed, collaborating with her on that as well. We actually used it this past weekend at the Music Box Village as well.
Awesome. Well, I just want to see if anybody else has any questions for Louis, since we have a few minutes together. If I don't know if there's like a hand raising option or something like that, but if anybody has any comments or questions.
Hey, what's up? Can y'all hear me?
Hey, Bruzy.
Hey, how's it going? Man, I'm wondering, I love hearing you talk about your process, and I'm wondering, like, do you feel like you can be, well, I feel like you made like this solo record with your name on it, but it still came with a lot of research and things like that. I'm thinking of La Costa Marguerite, and like you found documents that your French you know, your own French kind of like digging led to these artifacts. You were able to kind of live in that and make, you know, a really original song about it, putting all these different things together. That's I want you to talk about that a little bit, but I also want to know, is it easier to be more honest in French in a way?
That is the question right there. That's an interesting question because as a native English speaker, I never found my voice in English writing and singing. And I mean, I've made a few things that I'm kind of happy with over the years in English, but for some reason, once I started learning French, and like I said, I didn't start till I was around 18 years old, it became so much more natural for me to write in French and to sing in French. When I started learning French, I was also learning to try to sing the songs I had been hearing, you know, through my childhood and playing with the family band and all that. And it just came out like I finally found, for one, my register. Now, where does the register come from? Is it from house dances and having to sing loud? Is it, you know, higher and louder, and why and all that? But for whatever reason, I found my register of singing, and linguistically, I found my rhythm and I found my ability to write. And I don't know if it's, you know, I don't know if it's because it's something new, like I'm too comfortable, too self-conscious in English, where I'm like, oh no, that doesn't sound good. And that French is a second language, so I'm less harsh on myself. And it's more like, well, it's my second language, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Oh, and you know, and then there's Louisiana French, and how many variations on ways to say things are there. And then you have poetic license, and you throw all that together, and it's, you know, it's a whole different process. And I really just enjoy writing in French. And I don't think I've ever like written something in English and translated it to French, unless like asked to do so. Like we did those En Français projects with Bayou Teche, where we did rock and roll songs in English, and that was super fun to take an English song and translate it. But I've never written a song of mine in English and translate it to French. It's a very fluid process, and it usually comes pretty quick, except for in cases like Le Cata Marguerite, which you know, I happened to fall up on this story researching for another song that someone had asked me to write about their family, and I found it. And then I slowly started digging in, and it took me a while to actually understand what happened in La Costa Marguerite. And once I finally got the entire story, which was from the 1700s, of an African-born, which in the research says African-born slave, but if you're born in Africa, maybe she was born free, and eventually or quickly became a slave. And it said for the King of France, so like a national slave, or someone might know more about that. But I did all this research. I put the song together and I sent it to one of the family members of Marguerite Guillory, who, if you're not familiar with it, the Marguerite case was a court precedent after, more recently in the 1980s, because one of her descendants, she married a Frenchman, a Guillory, and they have, who knows, I mean, thousands of descendants probably at this point, because it's like 8 generations back, if not hundreds, if not thousands. And one of the descendants went to court saying, I want my birth certificate changed to take Negro off of it. And she won, and it became the Margarita case. So that's why it's called the Margarita case, because it's a court precedent. And so I did my best to tell the story, and it's a historical ballad, if you will, set to a rhythmic song that came from a dream for me, a kind of a bass line, a rhythm, and some samples I pulled from recordings my dad made in France in the 1980s of some bands from different parts of Africa, Les Frères Chayuki. And so I sent it to one of the descendants who had been doing the research themselves, and they said, yes, this looks good. I stand behind your version of the story. I said, okay, that's good enough for me. Put it out. And I was like, I don't want to get this wrong. It's not my story. And, but then since I've actually met more of the descendants, some local females who live around here, and some of them you might know, and if you judge by the last name. And recently one was at my house. They stayed for Festival International. Some friends of mine, a cousin of a friend, they stayed, and we woke up and we started talking, and it's like, oh, okay. Because I was like, are you related to Marguerite Guillory? Yeah, and she told me her version of the story that was passed down through their family, and it's a bit different than the story I came up. It's the same, but there's different details that have got me thinking. It's so interesting how, how all of that makes us all who we are in Louisiana, and the experience just keeps on changing and renewing itself, and the information keeps on kind of coming out. Older information, as it has a lot in the last few years, nationally and internationally, especially like, with the Native American movements and all that. It's just been so fascinating to see where you're raised, or I was raised one way in this educational system to think one thing, and then for the other parts of truth to come out, and okay, well, not everything you knew was accurate. And the world is much more complex than we think, and people are much more complex than we think, and within every community and every family and everything. So it's and then going back to the writing, and for someone who was raised in English to make their whole livelihood and artistic expression off of a language that I learned, but I feel that is part of my own story genetically. But it's that's a huge thing to say too. What is it like? I always felt like when I learned French that it kind of it filled in missing links of my life, and that may or may not be true. It might it's just so hard to say. But whether it's whatever the truth is, that we're not God, and we don't know these things. We can't talk to birds, like I said. But either way, it has definitely enriched my life, and the information that comes with the language, as we're talking about, is it also leads to the diversity and the complexity of our society and of our environment and of our reality.
Can I say something? Can I jump in now?
Hi, Sabina.
Hey, can I jump in now? Okay,
Please.
yeah, every time we have a guest speaker, there are words that come to mind. I think people that really are into painting, maybe there's a painting that they could actually complete while listening to some of these speakers. This was really, really interesting. I want you to know, Mr. Michot, that your presentation was pretty amazing. The word that came to mind for me was something I think I read years ago, and it's called cellular memory. And it goes back to the core of, what you're talking about. And sometimes it's almost like, why am I doing this? Or why does it mean so much to me? But in fact, your spirit knew the French language. Your spirit knew the culture because you were derived from the genetics of your father, who was derived from the genetics of his father, and so on and so on. So that French culture is such an inherent part of us. And that's why when you say, oh, it seemed like it came so natural, that is exactly why. But the way you phrased everything tonight was just, I think it was profound. It was really, really nice listening to you. All that cellular memory is equal to what we call, I think, our soul. So all of this, I know you're touching everybody tonight, and all the ways that this has touched you is what you, what you spoke about. And that's your soul reacting to what it actually is comprised of. And I think modern day, we call that purpose, right? I think. But I want to thank you. It was really, really good.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That makes complete sense. And thank you for sharing that, for real. That is definitely can help describe what I'm feeling, and affirm a bit what I'm questioning or saying the possibilities are. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Michot?
I just wanted to say it's always a joy to hear you talk or perform, and this has been really lovely, and I'm excited to collaborate with you anytime. So so thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiff. And yeah, it was great to be able to bring your art into the music. That was it was a perfect match.
I can't wait to do more, but yeah, I think that your integration of the natural environment and the history of French speaking culture in Louisiana, and just the way you integrate all these sort of disparate things into a really cohesive form is one of my favorite things about just the way that you work. So thank you. Mhm.
Pippin.
Speaking of cellular memory, have you thought at all about how you had talked a little bit about how language helped you discover some parts of your musical journey? Have you thought about how music aids in memory and language acquisition? We teach children when they're doing their first language that, things in songs to help them memorize. Have you thought about how music helps second language acquisition in remembering phrases or words or understanding language better?
Absolutely. I think that I think that the language has been one of the largest vehicles to keep the French language alive in Louisiana. And that is actually, I've never thought of it from that perspective though, because it is actually a tool, where music is a tool that, how do we remember melody? How do we remember rhythms and melodies? And it definitely links with how we remember language. And it's probably even more basic and inherent, if you will. I'm saying, like, if I wanted to learn Japanese, I wouldn't know where to start, but music would probably be a great place to start, because you bring the words and the sayings into rhythm and melody, and then all of a sudden it gives it more place. So that's I think you're absolutely right on that. And music has done a great job of keeping the language alive. And if our music wasn't so if our music wasn't so celebrated and protected in the sense of being, uplifted and put on a stage and such, and given a space and a value, then I think the language would be a lot farther behind. And but bringing it into teaching it as a second language is a great idea to continue, whether it be in schools or just education wise, and children's books and music and such. That's a great point.
I'm sorry, I always have to be kind of like the Ralph mouth when those awkward silent moments happen. It's like I gotta fill it in. I always tell people my first degree's in law enforcement, and we have the adrenaline rush problem, as law. So I want to say though, again, like, I really appreciate everything that you said. I wouldn't mind collaborating with you. Most people don't even know that I sing here. I wrote a song, My Soul, and I mentioned the soul early on, but my soul was yearning to be free. And then there's the spoken verse. I wrote this when my mom died. But at the end of the day, the spoken verse says that every creature always yearns to reconnect with its creator. And so the soul, sometimes when you look at TV and they show, like, maybe Ghost was like this. When Patrick Swayze was killed, the soul was like, oh, I got to get out of here. Couldn't wait to leave, and that kind of thing. So our soul is yearning to be free, sort of. But that is the name of that song. And I'd sure like to talk to you about it. My son's a music producer, went to Full Sail. I'm not trying to talk about that per se, but I just want you to know I have a little bit of a background. And I'd love you to hear that song and see what we can do.
I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear it.
I'm so glad,
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to reach out to you after the meeting.
All right. Excellent.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Sabina, send him your Kushma poem that you wrote.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I will.
Please.
Oh my God, y'all. Yeah. Okay.
We're making great connections. That's what these meetings are all about. I was also thinking back to when you were saying how to formulate this, just like the like are you able to walk outside and like hear the interstate and English versus going out and hearing the birds singing or French or whatever. There's access issues in some ways too, where and maybe thinking about the songs and like relating to how children are learning. Yeah, it just has me brainstorming. I know that there's like immersion schools and ways that young people are getting into the French, and I always think about increasing access to nature as well. I don't know if there's really like a point to this comment, but it just had me connecting the dots because there might be some people who would, prefer access, deserve access to more diverse experience or those like peaceful ways of life versus, just being stuck inside a city. But yeah, if just
I
something
think
I'm thinking about there.
What Ann said about, song and language, I think what you're saying, I think it all makes a lot of sense coming together where, using song not only for, yeah, it's language and it's, and it's like, I know part of what you've done in the past and different people do is, teaching about nature, teaching about music, teaching about language all together. And I think that's a great way that, people can remember things just through music. So I think it was a great point. It seems to kind of be a bit of the answer about what you're saying as well, is how to, how to bring things to the forefront and have them be remembered and keep them in memory and in turn in our cellular memory.
Yeah.
We learn so much.
There's and not like keeping everything so segmented, you learn this subject and this subject and this subject,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
that like beautiful like transdisciplinary like experience. And I always like just go back to the fact that culture is what it is because of the land that the people are on, and it wouldn't be what it is without that. So it's integral to it. And yeah, exploring different ways to like get back to that and spread awareness with that. I think all
Yeah,
great.
sorry. You mentioned access, and I wanted to, or somehow I thought of that animated series that y'all are part of, that Philippe.
Oh yeah, Boudini, great
Yeah,
movie.
the Great Boudini. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's something about that that's like kind of combining a lot of different things for another
definitely,
direct access point or something.
definitely. Yeah, I love that.
Well, we really appreciated being together. If anybody has anything else to add, feel free. Otherwise, thank y'all so much for coming. And we're recording this meeting, and we'll have that available. We have like a YouTube, which if you receive the link to this meeting, there should be a link to our YouTube, which is hosting our previous meeting. So this will be available there soon, and we'll send out an update about our next artist, tradition bearers and coastal issues working group meeting, which next month is going to be it's usually on the third Wednesday of each month. But since next month, that day falls on a holiday, it falls on Juneteenth, we will be meeting on June 26th, which is the following Wednesday. And yeah, if anyone has anything else before we depart, I appreciate everyone being here.
Thank y'all so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. I learned a lot, and great to see you all.
Thank you, Louie. Thanks for inspiring a great discussion.
Mon plaisir. Soyez vous autres.
Soin toi. Bye, y'all. Thanks so much. Merci beaucoup.
All right.